Hey everyone, I am the Freer of Souls, and we are playing Tactics Ogre. It's Butler here, and I'm with Patch. How are you today, Patch?
I'm like the prisoner of souls, so I guess we can't really get along anymore.
Between us, we create the perfect cycle of life. The circle of life. If you're watching this episode, hopefully you watched the last episode, because...
If you haven't watched the last episode, and this is your first episode, go back to the first episode of the series and watch in order. Not because it'll help you much, but it might explain some things.
Actually, don't go back and watch the first episode. How bad would that be? I'm gonna hopefully come back after like 100 episodes of Tactics Ogre and go look at the first episode and hopefully see the improvement in sound quality and stuff.
Would be nice.
And maybe just us speaking. This whole thing was a bit of an experiment for us because... Okay, how do we explain this? Once upon a time, we tried doing this, remember? With some early videos in at my desk when it was just us and we were like sitting next to each other trying to intro a video. And we sat there for like hours trying to, I don't know, get a good speaking voice and a good tone and be confident talking over a microphone with the intent of putting up video. And basically, we got nowhere.
Even this Tactics Ogre took us quite a while to get into.
That's my point. This is sort of training for us. We wanna be able to do this kind of thing, and in the future, and as we come up with other ideas and have other plans, play other games, you know, we want to do that. So this was just let's just not be so serious about it. We're not trying to make a full let's play. Let's pick some topics that we are pretty interested in and chat and just get used to talking on a microphone. It's kind of weird, especially for me, because I always say I kind of didn't have computers in my life for my early parts of my life, until my teens, whereas people these days sort of grow up in this world. I just got a few extra years where, you know, it wasn't always part of my life, and talking to people over the internet wasn't always the thing that we used to do, you know. Like now you make friends all around the world over the internet that you haven't even physically met. And
what Butler is trying to say is he grew up well-adjusted.
I don't know about that. Well-adjusted is... Whoa, that's a bit of a stretch. My point is just that I'm not as used to talking with people over microphones, so it's good having a microphone.
But that's not why you're here.
No.
You're here to hear us bitch about DC.
Right, that's why you really needed to watch the last episode. We're going to continue that discussion.
Sometimes we get on tangents as well. If this is your first episode.
God, this is the first episode. They missed that glorious cameo we had the other episode.
Episode 47, starting over, number 1, part 2, if you know what I mean. This is like our second start. We just introduced ourselves and our concept all over again.
Anyway, alright, I'll stop waffling and let you go on with the point that you were making.
No, well, in our last episode, we were talking about DC Comics and the DC Cinematic Universe, and Marvel as well, of course, and how the best thing for a movie would probably be to have a very memorable comic and put that in a movie form, preferably a comic with a lot of action and a lot of interesting character stuff. Not necessarily the origin story, because as we were just discussing, Wonder Woman's origin story is actually very plain and not particularly action-packed. At least the origin story I'm familiar with. Maybe they've redone it again.
Did you
they have
watch
redone
Batman v Superman?
I did not.
Okay. Because my point is, just quickly, because there's no point talking about it if you haven't seen it, but just for everyone out there, the Wonder Woman we saw in Batman v Superman, if there was a movie about her in that time of her life, that would be interesting. Basically, all she does in that movie is she's sort of like finding the lay of the land. She doesn't understand why Batman and Superman hate each other. She doesn't understand Bruce Wayne and Clark Kent. She sort of goes around meeting them and that, and then she shows up for the final fight. A movie with her in that setting, where she's just sort of around Gotham or around Metropolis, sorry. Like where she's just around these cities and maybe other cities to introduce other characters, like as the Flash from Central City, like where she's just around these places. Like that would be cool. but they went back and did an origin story, and I feel like it's not the Wonder Woman that we were introduced to. Anyway, that's all I had to say on that.
The problem with the origin story is it's somewhat plain. Wonder Woman lives on an island, and then a full female island of the Amazons, Amazonesses. I'm not sure the specific Amazonians, I think is the one.
Yeah.
And then a World War II pilot crash lands, and that's her primary love interest. But he's sort of the catalyst for Wonder Woman wondering what lies outside of her world and wanting to know more. And that's sort of the driving force for the character. And that is interesting in a character sense. Very, like, good motivation, very interesting sort of thought process. You get to see what all the characters' logics are. You get to see the state of the Amazonian, world, their, how they live and what their beliefs are. And you get introduced to all that. And that is quite interesting. However, it is very little action, very little comic booky stuff. And what I mean is like the stuff comic books for, like punching Nazis. There's actually very little of that early on. I mean, there is some of it when she, leaves and that, but it's not like a major villain was introduced.
That's my thing. With the movie, it'll become a bit of a, like, there will be that sort of stuff, but it'll be like training montage stuff, and
yeah,
that's kind of the whole point in a montage, is to sort of cut out most of the training, whereas if they're spending like 10 minutes on her learning to use a sword and sword fighting, it's like that's why we have montages, so we don't have to do this stuff.
And you know what? I don't believe a montage should actually happen in the first third of the movie. It should happen in the second third, before the final act, where your character has already sort of reached like their lowest point, and they're like, okay, I've lost. Now I need to pick myself up and get better and go back to it. Having them do the training montage in the first quarter is just sort of like, the first third is just sort of like, oh look, this is why I'm good. And then it's you get to the darkest point in the story, and then they just pick themselves up. They don't get any better. Like any of that. Yeah. It's the same person. Yeah. It's like, at least if you have the montage later on, you show growth.
It's really hard one, because the problem is like Wonder Woman is such a significant character.
Yes.
And they obviously, I get where they're coming from. Like, they obviously thought that they weren't going to do her, and what an awful word to use. They weren't going to do her justice unless they did an origin story. Like, yeah, that was terrible, as I was thinking it. But like they were saying, well, we can't just have her show up and expect moviegoers who don't know comics to enjoy her and appreciate her as much as the comic book, because she's like one of the most popular comic book characters, definitely a headliner for DC. And so, because everyone knows Superman, everyone knows Batman, this is their chance to really give Wonder Woman the fame that everyone, like comic book people who knew her, they were always like, you need to do this for her. So I get why she's got, origin story set up, but it's just, and it's probably interesting, like you say, all that stuff about her finding herself and meeting an outside world, or meeting a man and finding her place in the Amazon. It's like, that's probably all quite interesting, but as you say, as an introductory movie, it's not going to enrapture audiences unless you're already pretty invested in Wonder Woman as a thing.
Well, the problem is, these movies, people expect them now to have a certain amount of either goofy action or dark, gritty action. Like, you can't have a superhero drama, so to speak.
The problem is investment. You've got to be, like, that's the thing. Like, you can see this Wonder Woman and get her whole origin story, but if you don't know anything about her, it's just like, why am I watching this for 2 hours? Why do I care? Why do I care what her relationship is with her mother? I don't know anything about her to root for her at this point.
You know what? I think this is the case where, to do it well, you really need someone with a strong vision. You can't go for the generic superhero, layout of introducing the character, introducing their environment. Okay, now this is what changes. This, you can't do the standard stuff. You actually need like an artistic vision that really changes how the story is represented and how it plays out. And what I mean is, like, you either need to have the story playing out and then have flashbacks to Wonder Woman's origin. Like,
Well,
you have
what they
a
needed
current
to
story and
do-
then a flashback.
They
Yeah.
need to give people a reason to like her that isn't just because she's Wonder Woman. And
Yeah.
probably what they intended to do, they just didn't probably do it enough, in my opinion, is they tried to use Batman v Superman to do it. Let's be clear, Batman v Superman was poor in execution. The plot points that they were trying to do were there. I think the planning phase of the writing and that was fine, but then just how they sort of pulled it out was poor. They said, well, we want to do Wonder Woman, but we need to get her in so people know who she is before we do her origins movie. That's a big tick. The problem is they kind of didn't give her enough. Like, she just sort of skulked around, and
Yeah.
you didn't really know why or what, and then they just went, oh yeah, she was just keeping an eye on the world because the world's crazy and she's a super goddess, and it's like, what? Like, they just said that? You know what, there wasn't really... Yeah, and it was cool to see her show up for the fight and that was a really good moment, but it's just... You still hadn't seen enough of her to be properly invested in what was going on.
Yeah, and again, the other thing I was going to say, like, the other way to introduce Wonder Woman is to go back to that origin story and make it really stand out in style. And do it differently to the standard formula of a superhero movie. Even making it a drama with a little bit of action, don't get me wrong. Superhero movies can still have action, but making it more like a drama-focused story might do her more good and service than it would just making it a generic action superhero, movie.
Yeah, well, we don't know how it's gonna... I don't think the trailer really tells us much about, I don't know, where the end and the whole story. It just, the vast majority of the trailer just tells you all about her getting used to being, I don't know, what she is and training and learning what person she is and learning about her culture. And all that good stuff that everyone needs to know, but it doesn't really give much indication what she actually does when she goes to America or whatever.
Yeah. So the other aspect of this conversation, which we didn't really get to cover a lot, and is kind of the more important thing, is the difference between comics and movies, and why. And we briefly covered it with Wonder Woman, but it's why the Wonder Woman origin story doesn't translate well to a movie, is because in a comic, you can represent information much differently than you can in a movie. You can represent thoughts. You can have a bunch of characters reacting all at once to a single event, and show dramatically different expressions on their faces. Whereas when you do that with a live-action cast, it's a little bit harder, unless your people really know what they're doing. Like, you need a lot of talent to have a variety of reactions that are both subtle and believable. But something you can really see, and it's things that you can do a lot more easier in a drawn art style of comics than you can on a movie screen. Because on a movie screen, you have to work with people, and you have to work with, you got to play it to realism and things like that.
Yeah, and it's just the timing thing too. The audience can only absorb so many things at any given time, and if you throw too many things. Yeah, that was kind of ironic. I tried to use the innovate thing, which gets rid of the paralysis, and then I stumbled from paralysis. Yeah, the audience can only take so many things on, and if you say, it's the old thing. What I said last time, if you want to say, this is the shot of everyone meeting a certain character or something for the first time, well, in a movie, if you pan on everyone's faces at the same time, no one's going to get all the reactions, because there's just no appropriate amount of time to hold that single film shot for an audience to absorb everything. If you cut to everyone one at a time, it's going to look goofy and silly because you're slowly going through the cast. So what they tend to do to get around that is have everyone say something. But then they all say something in sequence. It's like, wow. Whereas
and
it's like, whereas a comic can hold that pose and hold those comments and expressions and let everyone take as much time as they need to fully absorb the scene.
Because that's the other thing about a comic, is it's sort of like a frame of a sequence of events.
Right. And
comic dialogue can look like it flows more smoothly because of that, and all these different things that we're trying to say about comics. It's I don't want to just say the same things over and over, but yeah, a comic can show a frame of time and host a dialogue in a different way to a movie, and that is very favorable to the comics in some of these origin stories because they were always comics. The famous pose, you know the one, of the superhero looking distressed, they've got their legs wide, they're holding a person slumped over in their arms, you know, one arm under the shoulders, one arm under the legs, and that person is presumably dead. Like, that is a famous, iconic position. If you do that in a movie...
Superman pose.
Yeah, it's... Well, I think they did it for, you know, many superheroes now, but that might have been the origin?
I don't know.
I can't remember. But it's... If you do that in a movie, it's going to look goofy. Because you don't do that. What you do is when you find someone dead, you know, you kneel over their body, you curl them to your chest, like... But a cinematographer might not understand that. They might go, oh, we need to do this, you know, iconic shot of the hero picking them up. And might look very silly in a movie. Whereas in a comic, it looks very powerful, because in a comic, you need to express that, you know, that pose, the emotion. You need it to be very big.
You give up the, like... You know, it's like, oh, body doesn't contort that way, or like that's where you have a bit of creative freedom in that, you know.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, special effects have gotten good over the years, so things like, you know, Goofy flying through the air and superpowers being used, like that stuff all looks pretty good now. Where back in the day it looked pretty, you know, cheesy, and the special effects were all very as best they could do. But that some of that stuff still looks really ridiculous. Like if you look at someone flying, 9 times out of 10 they're on a green screen. They've just held them on wires or something to that effect and blown wind in their face. Even to this day,
Yeah.
it's like it still looks a bit goofy. In comics, you don't have that problem again because it's fiction. You can do what you like with it. It's just there's so many things that don't translate.
Right.
I think the main one is the flow of dialogue in comics flows a lot better than movies. Because in a movie, 2 characters talking back and forth, you have to have them say it. And talking in a movie takes a long time. Like, in all things, speech takes a long time to get through in that sort of a medium. Whereas in a comic, it's just bubbles. And so you can have like a full conversation in a single panel. You can have them saying, you know, 2 to 3 paragraphs each if you really want to fit that in.
Yeah.
And it can just be back and forth, and then it's done. Whereas in a movie, you know, you got to have the first actor say it, stop, pause, the other person reacts, saying their bit, and then stop, pause, you know, the other person. And you got to frame it in a way that's interesting. You got to keep all this stuff. And it's just sort of a mess compared to a comic.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It'd be good to actually think about the difference between movies and like cartoons as well, because I know DC. What DC is doing really well is their animated universe is super popular at all levels for, like, obviously kids. They get a lot of mileage out of their popularity amongst kids, but also like they're deep and meaningful stories at a high level.
Well, that's because the DC universe, I've actually watched one of these. I watched the Aquaman. I don't want to call it an origin story because I don't know if it's like it is in the comics, but I watched the Aquaman one of these animated, I guess, movies. I don't think they quite go full length, but they're quite engaging. Yeah, you get the main character, you get an introduction to them and how, you know, who they are and what their life is like, and you get the backstory, and it introduces some villains, and everything sort of fits together really well. Like it all comes together, like, and you can appreciate what they've done and why this hero is important. I watched Aquaman, and he's got a lot of, you know, junk in the past to do with how he's lame powers, and over the years people have been like, no, Aquaman's really actually cool, and they did a good job of showing it in this movie. They had a reason that Aquaman was relevant and that Superman didn't just do what he could do, you know?
Yeah.
And then they had stuff in there that made the main character of the movie actually very important, where the Justice League couldn't act on his behalf. And it's these things that make really great movies.
Yeah, I just trying to, I mean, it's probably a bigger conversation than we have time for, to be honest, but I was just thinking in terms of things like, when you're talking about, say, having a conversation and how, you know, actors need to take their times to say this and say that and things like that. I wonder if you can skimp on some of that in a like a cartoon environment, because what am I trying to say? Because you don't need to like pause and like have each actor say that, like, you know, because they're not actors on screen. If you rush the dialogue or have people talking over one another, like, you don't tend to do that on screen much, because you're trying to,
No.
this is this actor's turn to say his line, you need to get it and have a shot of that person saying it, and then you cut it. Whereas
Yeah.
in cartoons you don't have that as much. Voice actors aren't, you know, they don't hinge on having a shot of their cartoon character saying something. They can just say it and just throw the line of dialogue in, sort of in amongst other dialogue and stuff. So I don't know, I think maybe that's not a good example, but I was trying to think of other things like that you can get away with in cartoons that are sort of holding back the movies. Like you say, when you're talking about translating comic book stories to movies, maybe there's some middle ground in cartoons that makes them, I mean, I say cartoons, I don't know if people class that as I don't know, that's not what anime is, that's more Japanese thing, but whatever the Western equivalent is. Yeah.
It's an animation, but it's a cartoon.
Yeah, I didn't know if there was a Western term for that sort of thing, but
Nah.
fair enough. So I don't know, but that's
No,
probably another conversation for another time. I was just thinking about
think
that.
it's still relevant. I do think that I agree that cartoons somehow lend themselves more to comics, because
I was just trying to
the
think of the
unrealistic-
ways that I've enjoyed the cartoons that I haven't enjoyed the movies, and I was just trying to think why.
You know what it is? I think it's because a movie, especially these big budget cinematic universes movies, they feel the need to be epic. They feel the need to have these long, sprawling, establishing shots. When you have when, we don't do references around here.
That was too good to pass up. I'm sorry.
Okay. when you establish a location in a cartoon, you might have like a shot of the country, maybe. You'll have a shot of the city, and in that shot of the city, it might have like a single landmark, and it will be just a single shot that lasts like 3 to 5 seconds, slowly zooming in on the same picture, or like sort of traveling, not actually showing more stuff, it's just the same, but it looks like it's traveling a little, like panning. And it'll show you that, and then it'll zoom in on the specific structure that this is taking place, such as a bar, you know, an important tower, something like that. It'll zoom in on, you know, like the Teen Titan Tower or whatever. So you know where the scene is about to take place. And then it's in the bar or in the tower or wherever, and it's panning across to show you some of the people in the shot, and it ends on the main character. And this entire thing takes, you know, maybe 10 seconds to show all of that information. You are now immediately informed without a single piece of word, you know, without a single word, where they are, what's going on, you know, who's there. And that's before a single word of dialogue is said. That's an establishing shot. In a movie, when they do the same thing, these shots tend to linger and drag out. It's like, okay, we want people to understand they're in this building. Let's do like a shot where it starts pointing at the ceiling and then swings down. Or let's have a shot of person walking into the building. And it's like all these different sort of things that aren't as smooth.
And I guess like when they're doing those shots in live action or in a movie, they have to do things like, if you say talking about a tower, they're trying to give it like perspective of how big it is or how imposing it is based on things around it. In a cartoon, you get away with not doing that, because it's pretty easy to, like, if we use the tower example, for example, you can make a tower of disproportionate size pretty easily, right? Because it's a cartoon, you can just have this massive thing that's like 30 times bigger than the next highest building, and in like a second shot of that, you get it. And it's unrealistic, it's silly, it's goofy, but it's cartoon, you get away with that. In a movie, you can't really do that. You get a building that's maybe
physical proportions.
Right, it's like proportion, like, and that's what you're trying to do in your panning shot. You're trying to say this tower is huge, but we need you to understand how big it is, because it's realistic. It doesn't immediately stand out. It's just a tower. So then you need to sort of pan and cut and say here's all the stuff around it, so you get how big it is and stuff. Whereas cartoon doesn't really need to like make that dawn on you, because you can just draw a big goofy tower and say, yeah, it's a big tower.
Yeah.
Like that's it.
I
It's a
think-
cartoon. That's just what happens. You can see it clearly.
And you know what? It's crossed my mind, and I think this is another really big important thing that I'll just cover briefly because we're getting a little short on time.
Yep.
And that's, I think, in the cartoons, it's assumed that you know what's going on. And admittedly, the Aquaman I watched was after the Justice League had already formed, but it didn't try and tell me what city I was in. It didn't try and, I mean, it might have had like a little, this is the city, but it didn't try and say, oh, this is Batman, this is what Batman does, this is Superman, this is what Superman does. It was very, the characters meet, they talk, because they already know each other, they've already been in movies together, and then they move on. And it's all about introducing Aquaman, and the movies just assume you know what's going to, the backstories and things surrounding it. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah, sometimes
Don't get
that's
me wrong.
good.
Yeah, sometimes like having the origin stories for each of them is fine, but your audience isn't stupid. Except I think you have to sort of treat a film audience like that. I don't mean any offense, but
Well, it's
you have
hard.
to
Like
treat-
for a cartoon, it's a lot easier to find. Like a lot of it has more history. There's more cartoons. You shorter episodes, so you can learn different things in shorter space of time. Movies, you kind of go in and there's no like background for a movie, and so it's harder to learn about the characters, especially the movies these days, because they're doing like a modern take on all the old storylines. You never quite know.
yeah.
Like I said, I don't know what Wonder Woman we're gonna get, because there's like 3
Yeah.
different backstories for her, and just things
Well,
like that.
Yeah, my point was I think they feel that for movies you have to sort of introduce every character, even though the backstory of Bruce Wayne has been done a dozen times now, and same for Spider-Man and all that. But they still feel the need to go through that process of this is the character, this is their supporting cast. And it's like, you don't need to necessarily do that. You just need to introduce those elements at a later point. And I feel like comics do that better
Yeah.
than film.
Telling the story backwards, not
Cartoons,
necessarily through flashbacks, but just through
Yeah.
things that come up that
It's through
explain bits about the
dialogue,
character.
it's through character interaction.
It's actually like cartoons are, even feature-length ones, are kind of like a TV series where they
Yeah.
don't just spit everything at the front, that you learn about the characters as you go.
Yeah.
Alright.
Well, I think that's all for us.
We're kind of
Yeah.
like getting quieter because it's like the runtime is nearly done. Yeah, so we did a bit of training in that episode. We captured ourselves a new party member, which is cool. Not a dragon, but a new party member all the same. And I don't know, we'll probably do a bit more training next time before we go on with the story. So thanks a lot for your time. Hope you enjoyed listening to us talk about comic books and movies, and we'll catch you next time.
See you next time.
Bye bye.
Bye.